Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for organizing this timely program, and it is my pleasure and honor to be able to speak to you today. I would like to start from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was approved by the United Nations General Assembly on 10th of December 1948. This historic document outlined the rights and freedom everyone entitled to, regardless of their gender, color, language, religion, geographical location, and political system. The first part of the preamble reads, "Where is recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and alienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." This is the strongest human rights document to which all of the government around the globe agreed, and which give all of us the right to be part of the decision in relation to our lives and to be part of the socio-economic, cultural, and political aspects of our respective countries. Rights are equally important, and we cannot prefer one over the others. All of these basic rights are equal and are connected with each other. In fact, the human existence is a right that no one can deny. The principle of human rights connect all of the institutions from the United Nations, National Institution of Human Rights, human rights defenders, civil society organization, and people who believe in equality and human dignity. The foundation of our collective responsibilities is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the equal implementation of those principles should be a reality for every human being. Each one of the institutions serve in different capacities, but all need a strong commitment to refusing to negotiate away the principle of human rights and rejecting excuses that undermine these principles. NHRIs can play a stronger role as they are inside their respective countries and know the socio-economic, cultural, and political structure of the people and governments. They are the ones who can understand the problem and have solutions for the problems. Of course, we can learn from each other's experience, but each country has its unique complexity. I want to share my experience as a founder and as a first chairperson of Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission in my country. I do not have time to tell you about the history of 44 years of conflict, but I want to say that from 1978 until today, different regimes come to power and gone. Every side of the continued conflict in Afghanistan has committed violation of human rights with impunity, from taking lives to violating all other basic rights, particularly of women and girls. The proxy wars that have been waged in Afghanistan have taken different shapes. Unfortunately, history repeats itself again and again. As you watch the news these days, you can imagine the situation of human rights in my country. War is not only destructive to the physical structure, but also to the human body and minds of the society. I personally have witnessed the destruction of people's life, livelihood, and behavior. The war has pushed us backward. Afghanistan was not a very developed country, but it was a relatively peaceful country. I went to co-education school in Helmand 57 years ago, and to co-education university in Kabul. Today, after more than half of the century, girls not allowed to go to co-education schools and universities. During conflict and war, most of the resources go to fighting. No one pays attention to basic social services, such as access to education. The current situation in Afghanistan is a good example of what happens when access to education is denied or used as a political tool to train the radical, aggressive, and violent people for whom human rights is not important. During that prolonged and violent war in Afghanistan, formal quality education was refused, which is why the majority of the people had no information about their basic human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to raise some points based on my experience on starting the AIHRCs in Afghanistan and how we achieved some success and built the confidence of the people in the institution. 1, political commitment. When we started the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission in 2002 in Afghanistan, there was a lot of pressure on me personally. There was no budget, building, staff, or facilities. But with strong personal commitment, we were able to establish the AIHRC. After 20 years of brutal conflict and different tension in the society, most of the basic rights, from rights to life, education, freedom of expression, healthcare, were violated with impunity. The violation of human rights and freedom of women were more severe. 2, impartiality. My colleagues and I worked with full impartiality on different issues in relation to the human rights. An example was to protect prisoners from torture. We were blamed by different authorities that we protected the criminals, such as the terrorist groups. But for us, it was a principle of human rights. 3, documentation. Documentation of violation of human rights enabled us to change the environment and laws in the country. We were not talking about rumors. We conducted extensive research and documented the abuses in order to address this violation of human rights. 4, gender equality. We stood firmly for gender equality as an important human rights principle. We took on all the sensitive issues of human rights, although we knew that this work would generate opposition by those who had the power to harm us, that we would be declared infidel. However, we took on these issues such as child marriage, forced marriage, bachabazi, or dancing boys, where young boys are used to dance and sexually abused. We criminalized those acts through legislation. 5, accountability and justice. We stood by victims of war despite of the pressure on the AIHRC. We were able to produce an exceptionally good reports after a national consultation with more than 6,000 Afghans on transitional justice. Our recommendation called for an end to the culture of impunity by all sides for violation of human rights, in particular violation of IHL. Cooperation and coordination. We worked honestly and without negative competition with the UN agencies, international and national NGOs, regional and international mechanisms, civil society, and individuals who were committed to principle of human rights. We shared information with those entities. We helped the departments within the government in their reporting on implementation of different conventions, including the UPR reporting. We also issued our own shadow reports on all of these obligations. 7, finally, we stood strongly and keep the independence of Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission from all the sides, despite the effort of the government to influence what happens at AIHRCs, even in every developed countries. United Nations agencies should be all committed to principle of human rights. It is not only the responsibility of OHCHR, special procedure, and the Human Rights Council. The UN is the guardian of the human rights, but sometimes at the country level, the representative of the UN agencies do not take human rights issues very seriously. The UN, the international NGOs, regional mechanisms, and individuals should coordinate, cooperate, and support the promotion and protection of human rights as their core responsibility. Fellow human rights defenders, I have the following recommendations. 1, the NHRI are the main force for promotion, protection, and fulfillment of human rights values inside their countries. Since they are familiar with the language, tradition, socioeconomic, cultural, and political structure of their countries. Other organizations and agencies will leave their country, but NHRI will stay, although this is not the case today in Afghanistan. We need to stop negative competition among institutions and stop duplication of the programs. Unfortunately, we witness these weaknesses in Afghanistan. NHRI should be recognized as the lead agency on promotion, protection, and fulfillment of human rights. 2, political and financial support for the NHRIs is key to their success. But in Afghanistan, some of the biggest donors spent billions of dollars on projects that were not useful, but they did not fund human rights program and the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. 3, more support is needed for human rights defenders, particularly women human rights defenders, journalists, and CSOs as an agent of change in their respective countries. 4, the lack of education, respect of people's religion, tradition, and culture should not be used as excuse for ignoring principle of human rights. This was very much the case in Afghanistan. Gender equality should be an absolute part of the project. If gender equality is ignored by UN agencies and the international community, then the conservative people with their backward mentality will gain more space and power. 5, coordination and honest cooperation between the UN agencies on human rights should be strengthening. Unfortunately, sometimes they do not coordinate and leave the human rights part only to the Geneva-based institutions. All UN agencies must take the human rights-based and leave no one behind approach. They must work to make human rights the reality on the ground for the people everywhere and all the time, including in emergency situations. 6, in emergency situations such as the situation in my country, where the NHRIs are under attack or where they do not exist, then the UN, NGOs, and all other mechanisms for human rights should fill the gaps and take responsibility for raising the issues of human rights. 7, we all need to put aside our political agenda and try to end the culture of impunity for international crimes, including sexual gender-based violence. Finally, I will say the human rights values are not Western values. They are human, universal values and connected to each other beyond our national boundaries. Our united and honest approach to these issues will make us strong and promote a world with justice and sustainable peace. Promotion and protection of human rights is a shared responsibility for all of us, and we need to walk the talk. My heart is bleeding as the AIHRC offices have now been taken by the current people who are in power in Afghanistan. But I am sure they cannot take the knowledge people got about their human rights from them. And this is a sign of hope for the future in my country. Thank you.